Zach, we are back and we are talking more moves to make before the season. Moves to make right now. There is one more week of move to make videos between you all and the regular season. It is time to get excited. But of course, the first move to make, like the video, leave a comment down below. Let us know what moves you're trying to make before the season. Let's get right to it. Let's talk some moves to make. Zach, give me your first one, getting to the content that people came for. What do you got for your first move to make?
The moves that I'm trying to make at this point in the offseason or season, whatever you want to call it, is really just focusing on building depth prior to the start of the season where opportunities are presented. It's really important for me, Bob, to not have to make a trade in the middle of the season due to one or two injuries. Sure, if I'm trying to compete and I've sustained 3 or 4 injuries, all right, cool, and I still want to try and compete, sure, then I will try and make a move. But if 1 or 2 injuries happen, and this is not a week-to-week injury, this is like a season-ending injury or an IR stint injury, I want to make sure I don't have to go out and make a move, because trading for players in season, Bob, is the most expensive time to do it. The fantasy season is 17 weeks. There's 52 weeks in a year. There's 35 weeks in an off season. And this is where you get to the psychological aspect of fantasy football, where people are bored, they want something to do. And so, I'm trying the entirety of the offseason from January to even August to make moves to improve my depth. I'm really trying to bolster areas of weaknesses now, not when I actually need to score points, because I've given up leverage at that point. If I'm trying to make a move, or if somebody's coming to me after they've sustained some kind of serious injury, I know that I have leverage in that situation, because obviously they're feeling a certain kind of pressure to make a move because they, like last season, the Nick Chubb injury, week 2, that was devastating. This was a piece that people had to win now. People are not building a long-term dynasty plan around Nick Chubb. So this is, when owners, they saw that injury last year on that Tuesday, probably teams are trying to make moves to pick up another running back to help themselves out. Man, it would have been nice to have Jerome Ford on your roster in that situation, right? My goal here, Bob, is in every league that I have, I'm trying to have double the starters I need. It's kind of harder to do this at quarterback, because if it's a super flex league, having 4 starting quarterbacks is pretty tough. Yeah. If you can do that, great. And usually one of those is like a Gardner Minshew or this 1-year quarterback. But I'm trying to have, if I have 2 starting running backs, I want 4. If I have 3 starting wide receivers, I want 6. And I don't necessarily mean count the flex spots on this, because then I can say I need 5 wide receivers, so I need 10. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to say I want to, a flex is a flex. I can start 3 different positions in there. I want to have 6 starting wide receivers that I'd feel comfortable about in that situation. So if I have 1 starting tight end, Bob, I'd like to have 2. That's kind of my goal. It's hard to do that, but that's what if I'm competing and I want a legitimate shot to win and do it the best I can and not have to make a crazy overpay of a deal midseason, this is what I'm setting up to do for the 35 weeks of the offseason that there is. You've got double the amount of weeks from your regular season. Again, 17 weeks, 35 in the offseason. Plenty of time to keep trying to chip away at owners and build that depth on these rosters. I bought 2 running backs just in the last 2 or 3 days, Bob, in one of my leagues, where my running backs were Kyren Williams, Tajay Spears, Chase Brown, Jonathan Brooks, and Marshawn Lloyd. So outside of Kyren Williams, nobody I feel good about starting. I acquired Ramondre Stevenson for Michael Wilson in a 3rd-round pick. I love Michael Wilson, but I did draft Marvin Harrison Jr. in that league. So I didn't need both of them. That's a little overkill. And then I traded for Zamir White, and I gave up Ricky Pearsall to do so. So in this situation, Bob, I picked up what I believe are 2 starting running backs this season that I can start. I can put in my flex. For 2 players I wasn't going to start at almost any point. I believe in starting Michael Wilson. I just have Marvin Harrison Jr. You know me. I'm not a fan of having 2 guys on one team in almost any skill position player spots. So I really try to spread those out. And then Ricky Pearsall, I like Ricky Pearsall, but I can try and buy Ricky Pearsall back next offseason. I don't know what he's going to do this season. These are the moves I'm trying to make now. Give me some depth. Give me a starter that's I'm not out here trying to buy the Bijan Robinsons. I'm not out here trying to buy the Breece Halls. But people are low on Ramondre Stevenson, man. And I was too. And I'm going to talk about this in my guys video. When a team invests in a player, I believe in that player now. And the Patriots invested money and years in Ramondre Stevenson, so I'm willing to buy. Let me get these depth pieces. Let me get these fill-in starters or guys that I would feel comfortable plugging into my starting lineup for, pieces that I don't really think would have helped me out now. Now, you might have to make other moves here where you do give up a starter to pick up 2 starters. You might have to diversify an asset. That's fine too. But again, I'm trying to make sure that I don't need to make the big in-season trade because it costs more. When Ramondre Stevenson has a 20-point week or Zamir White has a 25-point week, that's going to be in an owner's mind. Even if the week you're trying to buy, they scored 8, 9, 10 points, and be like, well, 2-3 weeks ago, that guy had 2 touchdowns. So it gets harder to make those moves as we get in season. So I'm trying to make sure now, Bob, that my depth is sorted out. I'm not trying to panic mid-season. And again, look, you can never prepare for 3 or 4 injuries. That's just fantasy sometimes. But can I make it so if I sustain 1 injury at each position, I'm still okay? That's what I'm trying to do.
We know, having gone through many of fantasy football seasons, that it is a marathon, not a sprint. And you're just going to lose players along the way. Sometimes the season-ending injuries, sometimes the short-term IR stints, or just short-term 2-3 week hamstring injuries, whatever the case is. There's going to be instances where you're losing players, and this is point scoring season, as you refer to it too, where players are the most valuable thing. Players are inflated with value right now because of the points they're scoring, and the second that flips over is pretty much after the rookie draft. It's kind of point scoring season because people are more concerned about what's next, players scoring points in the regular season. So 100% agree with this. This kind of goes into another concept of mine too that I like to work with building during this preseason, offseason, whatever the case is, stretching out my roster with starters, people I feel confident I can start with. In our Rewinders versus Patreon League, I am probably 20 starters deep on that roster, and I have no draft capital to speak of, but I am ready for injuries to happen. Maybe not as much at tight end. That's where I have some issues. Overall, that roster is ready, rocking to go. And the thing is, over the course of the season, if I'm able to maintain, get lucky with injuries, and that's not something I'm necessarily banking on, but over the course of the season, using this accordion concept I've talked about in the past, where you stretch out your roster and then you consolidate your roster back down to a smaller one, you tier up over the course of the season, I might be able to get myself into some really nice positions or spots where I have higher tiered players going into the playoffs, and that's something that this strategy lends itself to down the road too. You don't have to stick with these depth pieces, the Chase Browns, who I like a good bit, Tyjae Spears, who is probably a functional piece. I think people are a little higher on him this year than they should be, but somebody who can still produce for you in some aspects. So I love this concept, Zach. It's a great thing to bring forth, and you're running out of time to go do this, to set up your rosters and have that depth, because the season's a coming. But something else that's a coming is this next segment here. And last week we saw a divisional trade, which is rare, but Jahan Dotson was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. And this is just a huge avoid/sell for me. If you have Jahan Dotson, it's time to get the heck on out, avoid him if you don't have him. And I was coming into this segment being like, man, is this kind of a water is wet kind of a topic here, where it's like, man, duh, obviously stay away from the guy. Don't do anything with him. And before anyone says duh in the comments, he is now ascended to be the most traded player in Dynasty this past week per Dynasty Daddy's trade database. All I have to say, good on sellers, boo on buyers, especially for the cost he's going for, Zach. That's a kicker here. But let's break this down a little bit, talk about Jahan Dotson and why anybody who is the third wide receiver in this offense would be a no for me. But Jahan Dotson set to be the third wide receiver in this Eagles offense behind AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. However, there's a high likelihood that he's the 5th total receiving target in this offense behind Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley. You look at Dallas Goedert the last 3 seasons, between 84 and 87 targets. I wonder how many he'll have this season. It's probably somewhere in there. Saquon Barkley, at least 57 targets the last 3 seasons, topping out at a whopping 82 in 2022. And looking at last year's running back one there, DeAndre Swift had 51 targets in his 17 games. Easy enough to suggest that Saquon Barkley cracks 50 targets, which definitely pushes down the wide receiver 3. Looking at the third wide receiver aka the ugly stepchild of the Eagles offense since A.J. Brown arrived. The most targets received was by Quez Watkins in 2022, where he amassed 53 targets. Here's the kicker, in 20 games. So it took the whole season to getting to the Super Bowl to get 53 targets. Now let's look at other wide receivers. In PPR points per game, wide receivers who played 17 games in 2023 that had between 40 and 60 targets. I think that's the range for Jahan Dotson. I think 60 is pie in the sky numbers that he's never going to hit. 40 is a pretty decent floor, I think. Jalen Hyatt, 40 targets, 3.5 points per game. Van Jefferson, 43 targets, 2.4 points per game. Brandon Powell, 44 targets, 3.9 points per game. Khalif Raymond, 44 targets, 5.7 points per game. Khalil Shakir, 45 targets, 6.7 points per game. Nelson Aguilar, 45 targets, 5.7 points per game. Allen Robinson, 49 targets, 3.6 points per game. Michael Gallup, enjoy retirement, 57 targets, 5.2 points per game. And Rondale Moore, 62 targets, 6.2 points per game. This range tops out at wide receiver 74. The best finish in that range, wide receiver 74. I'm just saying, don't waste your time with Jahan Dotson. I can't do it. I was, somewhat behind on in a deeper league, having him as a flex starter at the cost I really wasn't a fan of the cost, honestly. It was more of, if you had him already, fine, keep him. But avoid or sell for whatever you can at this point. He's set up for roster clogger purgatory trades right now. Dynasty Daddy selling Jahan Dotson for a whole bleeping third-round pick is what the market suggests, looking at completed trades. Plenty of third-round picks going for Jahan Dotson. And what are we doing? What is the upside at this point? Yes, it's the Eagles offense. It's a better offense. There's just no opportunity here. So I can't do it. Avoid. If you don't have him, there's nothing to get excited about here, in my opinion. If you have him, please, I advise selling, especially if you can get a third-round pick. I mean, good Lord. It's almost, I can't do it, Zach. I know you've been more on the Jahan Dotson train, but I think this really changes everything when it comes to that situation. I think we have to look at it through a little different lens, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you still somewhat optimistic about this? Because I am not. What do you got, Zach?
Well, first of all, I somehow become the Jahan Dotson beanbag. I don't understand how this happened, because I don't care about Jahan Dotson. I never did. The reason why I was in on Jahan Dotson in the offseason was the cost to acquire. This is assuming he was the wide receiver 2 in Washington. Adam Peters, the general manager, very clearly did not like the roster he inherited, and rightly so. I can't say that Jahan Dotson is not a talented football player when he has scored 11 touchdowns in 2 seasons. Okay, sure. And that's not a fluke. That's not a small sample size. That's not a Quez Watkins. That's not I can't remember, Travis Fulgham size sample size. These are both Eagles, by the way. But all I can say is I'm probably not in on a third-round pick. I'd be in on a third-round pick if I could get a fourth-round pick back. But there are some other trades on Dynasty Daddy that are decent. There's Jonathan Mingo for Jahan Dotson. Yeah, let me get off Jonathan Mingo, please.
I don't want either of them.
Well, sure, but either or. The
lesser of two evils. Sure.
Right. Here's what I will say. Very clearly, Philadelphia wanted a wide receiver 3, and Philadelphia has come on top of most of the trades they've made with other teams. We always do that, Howie Roseman did it again, So, and that worked with DeAndre Swift. It worked very well for Philadelphia. All I'll say is this. I don't know how he fits into the offense. I don't know if he will fit into he's got to pick up a playbook. All I'll say is, either DeMonta Smith or A.J. Brown miss time. Boom, Jahan Dotson slots in that spot. But I look at Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore loves 3 wide receiver sets. Loves. That doesn't mean that Jahan Dotson is going to still be fantasy relevant. But it means that obviously Philadelphia saw a need, that they need a wide receiver on this team, because all we heard all training camp is it's Johnny Wilson or it's Olamide, whatever player. I can't remember what player it is. But there's just all these irrelevant players that were being talked about as Philadelphia's wide receiver 3. They identified a need. They went out there and they invested a third-round pick in Jahan Dotson. Kellen Moore in 2022 ran 3 wide receiver sets 67% of the time. Last year with the Chargers, 72% of the time. So there's still opportunity for Jahan Dotson. I am not the Jahan Dotson guy. I don't care about Jahan Dotson. Let me make something abundantly clear, because apparently everyone wanted to tag me after the trade. I don't care. This is probably actually a really good move for the Eagles, NFL speaking.
Yes,
Fantasy,
I
it's
agree.
probably not. It's probably not. But would I buy for a third and Jahan Dotson and a fourth? Yes, I would, because there's still opportunity. This is the point I'm always trying to make. Is there opportunity? Is Jahan Dotson a bad football player, or did he forget how to score touchdowns? Because he scored 11 in 2 years again. I don't know. Maybe it's the Commanders really suck at, putting together a competent coaching staff around him. Like, do we think Jahan Dotson is bad or Sam Howell is bad? I'm going to leave with Sam Howell. Because Terry McLaurin was out there running sprints. I'm not saying go buy Jahan Dotson. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I'm not off all the way. And if you want to be, fine. I don't care. Why does everyone think I care? I don't. I'm just in at a relatively cheap price. And that's what I always am. I hate how I've become like the Jahan Dotson stan. When did this happen? Why did this happen? I don't care. I just like buying cheap players. That's it.
It's just my good propaganda. That's all it is. I've set you up for this.
Even the Dynasty Rewind Twitter is like tweeting at me like, what did I do?
That's Derek's fault, not my fault. But either way, and maybe this just goes down to the fact of, and this is not, obviously there's different situations. Situations are situational. That's why they're called situations and situational. But just because a player's cheap maybe doesn't mean, hey, worth the buy all the time. And hey, we were both on different sides of the fence. I'm sure there will be more occasions than there have been in the past where, hey, this buy made sense at the cost. I was in, you were out, vice versa. I'm sure there'll be plenty of occasions, but it's just, hey, vet the buy. I know I'm quote unquote on the winning side of this at this point, whatever it looks that way. But something to think about too, as much as Kellen Moore likes his three wide receiver sets, the wide receiver 3 target share over the last 3 seasons in Kellen Moore's offense, 10.96%, 13.33%, and then 17.74%. So kind of a wide range, not great numbers, but the average of that is about what Jahan Dotson's career target share percentage has been so far throughout his career. So you can probably expect, I would say, a little less just because of the 2 wide receivers that are still in front of him and all the other players, like I said, being the 5th. And like you said, I totally agree. This is a great NFL move because they massively upgraded their wide receiver 3. As much as I don't love Jahan Dotson, better than Johnny Wilson, better than Anaya Smith, better than any other wide receiver they had there. It was Paris Campbell is the other name that was kicking around too. They've made an upgrade. They've made a good NFL move. However, good NFL moves, like you noted, don't always translate to being good fantasy moves. And that's the big kicker for me and why I'm very much out on Jahan Dotson. As much as I liked him as a prospect, it is what it is. Sometimes things change. But Zach, why don't you talk about your next move to make here? I am very much a fan of this. This goes back to one of our concepts that we talked about a lot over the course of the offseason in selling rookie draft picks. You're selling what those picks have turned into.
Listen, I understand that we play the game called Dynasty, but I also play a game called I Like to Win Money because I live in Florida and it's very expensive and I have a baby. So money is great, and so I want to win. And so what I'm trying to do in some situations is sell rookies that won't help me win now if I need to add starters or depth. That last line is so important. I'm not just selling rookies to sell rookies, okay? But I'm trying to win. I'm turning the page on a lot of my rebuilds, okay? And part of that is I need guys that are going to score points. And, if I can stash a Ricky Pearsall or a Jermaine Burton, I am stoked to do it. I'm so happy. If I can, those guys don't hold weight in this argument because their values aren't inflated. But there are other players that are. And so I'm going to talk about them. I am doing this, Bob, knowing that in the dynasty outlook, I may lose this trade. And I'm okay if it helps me win or try and compete. You're not going to win every year. You're going to lose a lot of years. And that's fine. But I am trying to win. So I'm trying to apply this in place where rookie values are overinflated at the moment of selling, not necessarily appropriately valued rookies. As I said, with Jermaine Burton is probably appropriately valued, like wide receiver 60 or 70, whatever. That's an appropriate value. So I'm not trying to sell Jermaine Burton, but there are a lot of rookies where their values are way too high right now. And so I went on Keep Trade Cut Michael Penix is quarterback 21? What?
Why not, man? Why wouldn't he be?
What? Like, he how does that make sense? I get it. He's a rookie, top 10 pick. I don't hate you if you like Michael Penix. I don't. Bob does. I don't. You're just not the Michael Penix guy.
I'm not the Michael Penix guy.
Yeah, and I don't care if you are, viewer.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
At quarterback 21, that means in a world where we're projecting things out, he would finish as a starting quarterback. If there's 12 teams in your league, they each have 2 quarterbacks in the Superflex league. The math says that's 24 quarterbacks, and Michael Penix slots in as quarterback 21. I understand it's a dynasty projection, but that doesn't make sense. So if I can sell on that, I'm going to sell on that. Trey Benson, running back 17. Don't agree with that. I know that we talked about that the other day on the video, and there was a lot of comments. But, listen, again, trying to win, not trying to stash every overinflated rookie. And that, by the way, that's how you lose a lot of value too, because not all these rookies. I mean, I wish I sold some Kendra Miller last year. Okay, so it hurts my heart to say that, man. I love Kendra Miller. Brock Bowers, tight end 4. Are we nuts? Are we crazy? Come on, man. Yeah. That's too much. That is too much. Yeah. So look, I looked on Dynasty Daddy for trades for all these guys, trades where I could sell these players, and I feel like I could get more points to help me win the next year or two, and still like not necessarily lose a lot of value on the trade, right? So I saw some trades, Dynasty Daddy. I saw Michael Penix for Brandon Ayuk in a 3rd. Bob, I sent you this trade because you weren't going to believe me if I said this. This happened today. As of recording this, you can go to Dynasty Daddy and look for Michael Penix trade. I'm so animated right now. And you can see that someone traded Brandon Ayuk and a 3rd round pick. It's not Michael Penix and a 3rd for Brandon Ayuk. It's Michael Penix for Brandon Ayuk and a 3rd. I put next to this trade on the show sheet just the mind-blown emoji. I also saw Michael Penix for Josh Jacobs. I thought that was a little bit more tepid, a little bit more realistic, right?
Sure.
Let me get a running back that's probably in a good spot for at least this season. And that can help me, fill out a starting running back spot. So those are some Michael Penix trades. I saw Trey Benson for Bo Nix. Oh, I would love that trade. Bo Nix looks good, man. He looks good. I don't know.
Weird.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't dove into that situation, but I've watched replays and stuff, and he looks good. If I could sell a backup running back that at the end of the day is a day 2 running back, has no job security, they could easily just draft another running back next year. You have no idea how that's going to go. For a starting quarterback, I'm in. And then I saw Trey Benson and a 2nd round pick for James Cook. That's a little bit more like you're upgrading at the running back position. You're having to give somebody to do that. And you don't lose value in James Cook next year. Like they already brought in another running back in Ray Davis. So clearly they believe in James Cook in that offense. Plus you saw how that offense was the second half of the year geared around James Cook more so than Stephon Diggs. So I think that's a great move there as well. And then Brock, this was a very simple trade. I saw Brock Bowers for Dalton Kincaid. And I think, you lose no value in that trade moving on from Brock Bowers. Because, again, I do think in some of these trades, you could possibly lose value in 2 or 3 years. Like I said, you look back on this trade and you're going to be, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But Brock Bowers for Dalton Kincaid, you're both just getting 2 young tight ends. The difference is I'm getting a tight end in a premium offense with a very good quarterback. And you're not getting that with Brock Bowers. You have no idea how that situation is going to play out. I am about security when I'm buying some of these players. If I'm selling Brock Bowers, I would like some security in that transaction. And Dalton Kincaid is as secure as it gets. I mean, another at least another 2-3 years in that offense guaranteed. Probably, if he plays well, gets a contract extension and is tethered to Josh Allen for, 10 years at this point. So I want to move some of these players that have overinflated rookie value that doesn't make sense for right now for players that I don't necessarily, these are not like I didn't trade, Michael Penix for Geno Smith where I could lose out on, on a player in a year. Brandon Ayuk he's going to be around and he's going to get a very nice contract extension. Bo Nix going to be around for 4 or 5 years at least. James Cook going to be around for another 2-3 years. Dalton Kincaid not going anywhere. So I just turned players that are not going to score a whole lot of points in the short term. Probably. I could be wrong. but probably the math checks out on that. For players that I can easily slot into my starting lineup and give me some points right away, Bob.
It goes in line, you mentioned it too at the top of your point. You can't get too caught up in dynasty. Rookies are fun. Rookies are great. Rookies are great for estate planning. But if you are trying to make that competitive push, and that's what you're trying to do, suggesting these deals, you're not just trading them for the sake of trading. I don't hate the concept if you're maybe doing these to even like the Bowers for Kincaid to look to even compete next year, because that Kincaid Josh Allen thing not going to change in a year. Brock Bowers could still have a bad quarterback next year. We don't know yet. And I tend to agree. Some of these guys are just a little inflated. And I'm not saying, you're not saying either, just sell for the sake of selling. Don't sell these guys for a future second to replace, just re-roll the player, the pick, whatever. We're trying to actually make deals that improve your team now, set you up now, and maybe even a little longer. The one, I guess, nitpick thing I have with the Michael Penix deal, I can't imagine a lot of teams are really going to go for that, but the structure is here. Maybe it's a case where you have Michael Penix and Jaden Reed, and you go get Brandon Ayuk or something along those lines.
It's the principle, though, Bob.
Exactly.
I agree with you.
I agree.
You're probably not getting a Brandon, but the fact that is out there and that you can turn Michael Penix into points and security, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things, talking about the Trey Benson deal in like YouTube comments the other day, where it was, yes, long term is great, but I'm trading him to get points on my roster now, and I think it's more likely that Trey Benson's value goes down this year when he doesn't do much. I mean, if you want to root for a James Conner injury and you just are banking on that, fine. I don't think that's great analysis. I don't think that's great process. But if that's what you're going with, Trey Benson has a fine enough college profile to project something more for him in the NFL. But I'm not about that. James Conner has been very good and, has missed a couple games over the last couple years, but still a very good player. Let me, like you said, take this value of these overinflated rookies, because everyone wants the new sexy thing, and let me trade that for security, points now, all the above, and just have a known asset. This is why we suggest trading rookie picks in the first place. You can still do the same thing. Some of these guys' value have already inflated or deflated, so that's why just selling the pick outright from the jump is a great move. But this is awesome right now to kind of keep up on it, Zach. So I like this move a good bit as well. Getting into my second one here, and as of today, NFL rosters have to start trimming down their NFL rosters to the 53-man rosters. So I suggest you be working on doing the same, at least if you want to set a lineup at any point this season. And I think if you want to win games, you probably want to be doing that. So one great way to identify easy roster decisions for yourself is to see what the NFL does. We talk about this all the time. The NFL is going to do what it's going to do. We need to adjust based on what's going on with the NFL. So every offseason, we stash plenty of players with the hopes of them being worthwhile, being the next great dynasty stash, being the next sleeper, wide receiver, whatever the case is. But unfortunate fact of the matter is a lot of these guys just don't pan out because it's a tough league at the end of the day. But pay attention to who gets cut this week, today, tomorrow, the rest of the week, and you can almost certainly feel free to cut them as well. In August of 2023, Zach, 421 players, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, fantasy relevant players, were released or waived by their teams. Out of that 421, 3 of them went on to finish in the top 50 at their respective positions. Tommy DeVito, quarterback 35, Bailey Zappi, quarterback 40, and Tanner Hudson, tight end 26. All players who were cut, waived, and picked up by their own teams for whatever that's worth. So they're players that aren't going to other situations, having to learn new playbooks. They have an idea what the playbook is, whatever the case is. And at the end of the day, too, these guys are on the first train in Nowheresville now. They're not, the next great thing coming into dynasty or fantasy football, and you don't have to cut all these guys. You can try throwing them into deals, whatever you want to do. But I think too often I even have, this guy got cut, but he got practice squatted by such and such other team. Definitely worth holding on to. Whatever the case is, I've gotten sucked into this trap. But at the end of the day, they're not good enough for an NFL roster. So they probably don't need to be on your roster at this point. And if they're rookies, there's a little more leeway. If you have the room, fine. Although I wouldn't recommend or would not personally do it, putting them on the taxi squad, because it locks you into holding them unless you just want to give up that spot if you just end up deciding to cut them. And I'd rather use that taxi squad for players I'm far more confident in keeping in the long term. But anybody else, veterans, you pretty much feel free to throw the waiver wire. If they end up slightly relevant, it's likely they'll still be on waivers anyway. All of these guys, Tommy DeVito, pretty confident Bailey Zappi was on waivers in leagues. Tanner Hudson definitely was on waivers in leagues. So either way, get them off your roster. Doing this right will also free up space for waiver additions of players that actually made NFL rosters every year, obviously depending on your league format. If you're a 40-man roster, 12-team league, there's not a lot kicking around on waivers, but I do know there are some shallower rosters that of teams that like having a more active waiver wire. You're going to need to make space for players, and getting players that just aren't even good enough to be on NFL rosters off of yours seems like a good track record. Just if NFL cuts them, you don't need to hold on to them and stash them any longer. Zach, I'd love to hear your thought before you get into your last point.
Yeah, this is a good example of not succumbing to FOMO, right?
Sure.
I think a lot of people or a lot of dynasty managers are like, this is going to be worse. And at a certain point, it's like the stock market. You just got to be okay sometimes taking an L. And that the only way you take an L in this situation is A, this player comes back to relevancy, and B, succeeds, which 99 out of 100 times it doesn't happen. There's only one story of a Joe Flacco out there where he comes in out of nowhere and he's really good. Like, that doesn't happen very often. Even on weeks where you had Tommy DeVito doing well, it was really risky to start him, man, because you could get 17 points, you could get 6, So, sometimes you just got to be willing to take the L. Like, another good example of a player that you were mentioning is Ryan Tannehill, right? I had a roster where I was holding on to Ryan Tannehill. I'm like, he's going to, somebody's going to suffer a devastating injury. And like, there have been no quarterback injuries in preseason, which is unheard of. But I think teams are
instead of JJ McCarthy.
Right. And even then there was kind of a plan for JJ McCarthy not to be the quarterback.
Fair enough.
But, I think NFL teams are being way more cautious with preseason, the plays that they're exposing their players to in preseason, and because of the elongated season now. Now we have 17 games. We have international travel. We need to take care of our players better. So Ryan Tannehill was a player just last week on a roster. I was like, I got to cut. And you could see that sleeper roster number just decreasing. It's like 24% have Ryan Tannehill. Oh, now 21. Oh, now 18. It's like, it's probably time to cut bait here. And look, he's probably going to get a job at some point in the season. That doesn't mean he's going to be good. It just means, and you could play the waiver game at that point. So this is a good point. Don't have FOMO when playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. It's like I said, it's like the stock market. Sometimes you're going to lose, but if you do it, if you have the right process, it's okay to lose once in a while on something like this, because the chances of it happening, of a Tommy DeVito or a Tanner Hudson being relevant again, is slim to none. And it's not worth you holding on to that roster spot. I'd rather, go out there. There's a lot of guys that are wide receiver 3s on teams that we never take into account. Like this year, it's like Jalen Naylor, whoever's going to be the wide receiver 3 for the Commanders. Like, there's a lot of situations that I'd rather have that player than a stash player like a Ryan Tannehill or a Tommy DeVito or a Tanner Hudson.
If you need help unclogging your roster, pin comment below or the YouTube description box. We'll also be doing a Keep Trade Cut unclog your roster video early on in the season. I think week 3 we're aiming to do that. But with that little shameless plug in the book, Zach, let's continue on to your last point here. What do you got? Your last move to make?
This point, Bob, kind of just piggybacks off yours, right? With trimming rosters and making sure I don't hold on to too much fat. Can I offer these players to other owners in a sort of handcuff / depth piece scenario? And look, this point applies to me. That's why I put it on here, because if you offered me, if Josh Dobbs is Brock Purdy's backup quarterback and you offer Josh Dobbs for a 4th, smash. I will accept that. I need that security and knowledge that Josh Dobbs is the backup quarterback. Like, hey, man, Skylar Thompson right now is a nice little backup quarterback if you got Tua Tagovailoa. I'm not saying anything crazy, but this is what this point is. There have been some dynasty managers that believe in this process, and I'm easily one of them, okay? I would offer a late-round pick if it meant guaranteed security at a quarterback or a running back position in case of a catastrophic injury at a running back, wide receiver, Wide receiver, not so much, but running back and quarterback position. But a good example of this last year is I was offered Zach Moss in our Rewinders League last year prior to the Jonathan Taylor injury, and I was like, nah, forget you. And look, I'm not imperfect, all right? I got my dynasty game is still growing and still evolving, and I am so okay with saying, hey, I was wrong about XYZ, okay? And I should have rostered Zach Moss last year, and that probably would have helped me a lot. Still made the playoffs in our Rewinders League, but didn't do very much because I didn't have that backup plan for a Jonathan Taylor. That was a catastrophic injury, and I was trying to make it way with Chuba Hubbard and didn't know when to start Gus Edwards last year. So I really regret not having Zach Moss. And obviously he had a very good season in place of Jonathan Taylor. So look, this isn't always going to work out, but that's why the cost is a late round pick. If you lose, if Zach Moss never started a game last year, it's a 4th round pick. I'll be fine. Who cares? You will survive the loss of a late round pick. And if you do need that player, it's a major pick me up in a spot where your season could have been over. That was probably one of the reasons why I think I lost in the first round of the playoffs in the Rewinders League, and I didn't have a backup plan. Like I think I missed out on the first round by 1 game to you, as a matter of fact. And maybe if I had Zach Moss, I get that first round bye, and you're playing week 1. That's a huge difference, man. That is so invaluable. Like I automatically advanced to the top 4 of the fantasy football league. So, again, just can you offer these quarterback cuffs that you need to trim some fat on your roster? They make sense for other owners. Just knock on the door and say, hey man, are you interested in a 4th round pick, 5th round pick? Because maybe you want to go claim a Jalen Naylor or a Skylar Thompson or a Diami Brown, whatever it was the last couple of weeks. These are players that have all been in the top 5 of the trending on sleepers in terms of your free agent pool. So not a game-breaking point here, but if I am trying to make room on my roster, I'm not just cutting these guys. Look, Tommy DeVito, that's a cut. Okay, he's not even the backup quarterback. But if I got Drew Lock, hey Daniel Jones, you give me a 5th round pick for Drew Lock. What do you say? Just trying to make these moves, bolster my late round draft pick pool, or bolster my depth depending on which side of that deal I'm on.
This is a great point, Zach. A great addition to trimming your rosters, because this is not the only way to do it. Cutting players who are not on NFL rosters anymore is not the only way to do it. Another great way to do it, as I mentioned already, roster view option in the pin count below, as well as the YouTube description. With all that said, we are going to get the heck on out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.